Hi there, Helena here, with a little preamble before I get into today's episode, because I want to make sure I properly introduce my first ever guest, Sandra Tuszynska. I'm interviewing Sandy because she's got this special combination of two specific things. The first thing is that she's interested in divine truth. If you've listened to previous episodes of this podcast, you'll know that divine truth is really important to me, and it actually provides the spiritual basis of the entire podcast. Sandy's a member of Divine Truth's nonprofit arm called God's Way, so she's pretty committed. And the second thing is, Sandy's got actual experience with U.S. culture because she lived in Philadelphia for a year. So that being said, I hope you enjoy my conversation with Sandy. Hi, and welcome to Born in the USA, Unloving American Attitudes podcast. I'm your host, Helena Martin. Today I have a special guest, my friend Sandra Tuszynska. Sandy, could you just tell me a little bit about yourself, like, as hard as it is to, like, encapsulate your whole life into a few sentences or like, a paragraph? Tell me, where are you from originally, How long you been in Australia, that kind of thing.
Yep, so I came from Poland originally, which was communist when I was growing up. And I arrived in Australia in 1990 at the age of 12. And lived my life here, got schooled, ended up at university, ended up getting a degree in agricultural science, and then majoring in fungi. So that's my passion in a nutshell.
You like mushrooms. You like all things
I love
nature.
all live things. Yeah, I love living things. I love God's creation.
Yeah.
And I'm a bit obsessed, actually. And I think it's a good obsession to have.
Excellent. All right, cool. Thank you. So today what we're going to do is that I'm going to talk to you a little bit about your experience in the U.S. because I know you lived there for a year. And then we're going to pull out any common attitudes or trends that you noticed amongst Americans there, or if that just applies to Westerners in general, because I know you also lived in the UK briefly, and, obviously you grew up in Poland, and you've lived most of your life in Australia. So you have a lot of experience with living in different Western countries. Mm-hmm. And then in that conversation, we can kind of just try to bring things back to the principles, the 5 principles.
Cool.
Right. I've introduced that on the podcast, what the 5 principles are, in a very cursory manner. But if you think that there are certain spiritual principles that are more lacking in Americans or Western cultures in general, and if we should focus on more than others, does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay. Cool. All right. So let's get into it.
Yeah.
All right. So, your experience in the U.S., where were you staying, and how long did you stay for?
Yep. So I ended up in Philadelphia, and I must prefix this with this sort of comment that I really didn't want to live in the US, because what sort of happens when you're in academia and you just finished your degree and you want to do a postdoc or a PhD, a lot of people leave and go overseas, and most of that time the US is the best place that actually takes people on.
Okay, so everyone's trying to go to the US.
Yes, and it's just kind of like a thing to do, it seems,
really?
because I think there's a lot of uptake and there's a lot of research going on. So it's like a common thing in the sciences, particularly, to take people on. And I was kind of like, I'm not doing, I always want to rebel against any sort of, everyone's doing this, I'm not doing this.
Gotcha.
And I was like fighting, going, no, I want to find a postdoc somewhere else, and I ended up in the US. There was a research scientist that I used a lot of sort of, to sort of like work on my research. So she was a German woman that lived in Philadelphia. She was I shouldn't say lived at Philadelphia. This was Rutgers University in Camden, which is in New Jersey, but it's like a train one stop from Philly. So basically most people that attend live in Philly.
Okay.
Camden is not a place you want to live in, really. It's very poverty stricken and there's a lot of crime, but that's where the university is. So I ended up there and lived in Philly for a year. What a privilege that was. So all my preconceived notions of I don't want to go to the US, I hate the US, it turned out to be quite a great surprise. Yeah.
I think Philly is pretty cool. I've only been there once because I had to go because it's the birthplace of graffiti, as I've told you.
Yeah, I love the murals.
Yeah, and they've got a great public art scene, but it is there's something gritty about it. But it's also cool because it was the U.S. Capitol for like 10 minutes.
Benjamin Franklin.
Right,
cool
so there's a lot of cool history there as well. Yeah.
Very cool history,
Yeah. So you were living in Philly, and how long ago was this?
So this was 1990. Sorry, I'm not that old. 2000.
This is 1970. No, just joking.
Yeah, so it was in 2006, 2007. I think I started my postdoc in 2006.
Okay, so about
Yeah.
18 years ago.
Yeah.
Okay. All
I
right.
think it was about either 2006 or 2007.
Okay, so it's post
Yeah.
9/11.
Yep.
Yep.
Yep, which is an interesting topic I want to talk about.
Oh, okay. All right. Excellent. I'd love to get into it. Okay. All right. So we got a little background about you and your time in the U.S. So what are any common attitudes or trends you saw amongst U.S. citizens while you were there?
Yeah, so one of the most interesting things, which I actually really enjoyed and liked, was the first night we landed. I went with my ex-husband now, but we both went to the US and we kind of he's got family there, so that was kind of a connection we could make straight up when we got there. And we went to dinner for someone's birthday, and it was like a restaurant, and we ordered pizza, and I was absolutely shocked at the size of the
Yeah, the
pizza.
portion sizes are big.
Seriously, like one slice is the size of what we get as a large pizza in Domino's, in Australia.
Here in Australia, yeah.
So like the slices were so big, I was like, I couldn't stop laughing. I was shocked. I was in shock, I loved it that it was so like giant. Doesn't necessarily mean quality based, but
Right.
at least big, and I love big portions.
Yeah.
So I've noticed that, this kind of, giant, like I just learned to drink my tea in a large cup, and I still do that, like a big mug, because like supersize me sort of a thing is a thing. And to be honest, I enjoyed it, but that's because of my own sort of feelings of lack that I've imbibed in communist Poland.
Right, sure, of course. So
Sort
you're
of
like,
like
oh,
this
please.
lack,
Yeah,
give me
are you sure
more.
this is free? Like, we
Lay
can
it
have
on.
this? Yeah. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, so it was very, it was kind of like, but it was shocking to me, because I wasn't used to it. Australia certainly isn't like that. Definitely where I grew up wasn't like that, so it was kind of a shock. But it's sort of, it just, I felt that even back then that it was just this feeling of like, this pride in everything's bigger and better in America. This
Yes.
big sort of that Cold War sort of situation between Russia and America.
Yes.
You have this feeling in the society, and I feel that that's kind of it is prominent when you go there. And I suppose it varies between different places. Maybe Philly wasn't similar to New Jersey. It's actually quite striking how different states seem to be, and even in that regard, like Philly's quite more like European in a sense, it felt like,
Yeah, I would say America is a bunch of little countries put
Yeah,
together. There's some common themes, but
yes, it's wonderful. But there's also like another theme along those lines is like one of my friends, she was actually Ukrainian. She worked in the same lab as I did, and she had an American husband, and he had this giant truck. It was just like a SUV, but it was just huge, like on steroids, loud, lots of guzzling of gas, what you would call, you know. So like lots, I don't know, I think it was diesel. I don't know if it was diesel, must have been, because it was really loud, you know. But it was so big. It was this feeling of like, I'm the man and I'm entitled to use half the street, like half the road, you know. There's just feelings of sort of like the bigger the better, but also that wear it with pride sort of a feeling, you know. And I found that quite like, I don't know, like sort of an like I didn't find it appealing, you know. I found it intimidating in a way, or like this feeling like, if we all lived this way, what would the world be like, you know?
Right.
This kind of feeling back then I already could feel inside of myself. So there were big shocks, you know, culture shocks, I suppose. And it just made me laugh at the time because I was just shocked, you know. I didn't give it much thought, but now in retrospect, these things did sort of impact me in a way of noticing the cultural differences between the US and other countries, yeah.
So growing up in Poland, what kind of cars did people have? Did they have like smaller cars? Did you guys even not have, like a lot of people didn't drive in cars, they took the train? Like what was the deal?
Yeah, we didn't have a car. My mum and I didn't have a car. My grandparents didn't have a car.
How'd you get from place to place?
We walked everywhere.
So you lived in the city?
We had no phone. No, I lived outside of the city. We had to walk into the town itself.
How long did it take to like go to town to go to the grocery store?
Sometimes half an hour, sometimes, you know, depended. Like there were little shops here and there, like, you know, but if you went to town, you probably walked for half an hour and then carried all your shopping back.
Okay.
And had your own bags that, you know, grandma would have sewn. Like it was very, very different.
Right.
you know, everything was recycled in the sense that, yeah, like everything. And there was hardly any plastic back then. And, you know, I know Australia used to be like this at some point, maybe more sort of 60s, you know,
Yeah.
but Poland was sort of at that time still when I was growing up. So back in the 80s and early 90s.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was very basic, you know, didn't have a phone, like if you wanted to visit someone, you just knocked on their door. You might have walked an hour to see them and they might not be home. So
Right.
yeah, it was very, very like you lived on faith more, you know, like as
Yeah.
in you just go and follow your desire. And then if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, you just go visit someone else. Or, you know, it was very different expectations in life, I suppose. Yeah. Yep. So I was a bit shocked because America was like Australia on steroids, really. And Australia already, to me, seemed very
Right.
opulent, you know.
Yep.
Wasteful. I found that both the countries, and particularly the US, felt very wasteful to me, you know. Another sort of thing that comes to mind is shopping therapy. I remember whenever I fought with my ex-husband.
Retail therapy.
Yeah, I used to literally go shopping because clothes were so cheap and so actually quite nice, you know. I bought some really beautiful things. I don't know, they were probably made cheaply in China somewhere, but honestly, at that time, I was like, this is heaven to me. But the amount of waste that it produces, you know, and the fact that you can just go and buy it really cheaply just meant it's just not a commodity that you're appreciative of, you know. Growing up somewhere where clothes were handmade most of the time because you couldn't buy anything really back in those days in Poland was very
Because it was too
difficult.
expensive and because there
It
was
just
very
didn't
little
exist.
supply.
Very little supply and very much the same. So, you know, if you had something that someone made you, you'd have unique clothes. So if you were lucky enough to have a grandma or a mum that sewed or knitted, you know, and so then going into this, you can see where it all kind of like, it can become an addiction, you know, like I was addicted to shopping. I was just I'd never think of myself in that way, but that's what it became.
It makes me think of like a kid who's never allowed to play video games and then he leaves the house and his roommate at college has a Nintendo and he just goes insane and just wants to play it every day because he's never had it. Yeah.
It's like an overstimulation, but also how it can be used very addictively to avoid a lot of pain. So I used it as an avoidance of my sadness about having fights with my husband or having disagreements or whatever, you know. And I remember using it, and I remember how good it made me feel. It gave me a hit of power somehow that I felt like, yeah, it just gave me this feeling like I can do this at least, and just like almost like a like a rageful entitlement, you know. It's sort of like that's what it felt like. I remember the feeling I had when I used to go and like stuff, you know, fuck you, sort of a feeling. Like, I don't know, it's really quite dark now that I think about it, you know. I haven't given it much thought since then, really, but I remember having a hit from it. And it kind of got me away from how I felt at the time. So I think that's where the US has got more than other countries and probably more than any other country.
Very abundance.
Yes, the abundance of everything to a point and cheap, quite cheap. Like I found that food was very cheap as well, comparatively to Australia, for example, you know. So that means you could just indulge and overindulge in, as you know, like the supersized meals, and people are larger in general, I found as well, you know.
Yeah.
And Australia is very similar. Especially like if you go to more like, you know, poorer areas where people can't go into Whole Foods and get really good quality food, you know.
Right.
And yeah, so I just feel like it's sort of geared towards bigger, better, thinking it's bigger and better, but actually it's more like lower quality and more amounts of it. So like very...
Quantity over quality.
Yes, and very sort of exploitative in a way, you know, both of the people, the consumer, as well as, I suppose, manufacturers as well, you know. So
they're exploiting the workers who are making it or the countries they're getting the resources from, and that's why it's so cheap.
Yes.
Right.
And I think all of this comes from this real deep feeling of entitlement, which I think also covers over some deeper, you know, feelings of lack actually underneath and fear that there won't be any. I think underneath all of us have this, you know, historically this feeling that I need to get for myself because I'm just afraid underneath that I won't get any. I'm not sure if that's the truth, but I feel that goes along with, you know, all the wars that have happened in the past, and
it's a fear-based
response.
Phenomenon.
And also mostly entitlement, I think, just to cover over that, you know, and maybe it's covering over just the feeling that of superiority as well, you know, feeling like I deserve this because I'm good. I deserve this because I'm better than, you know. Yeah, I've reflected a lot about this, and I say all this because I actually have very similar. I feel like a lot of how I've been raised I've used a lot of these sort of entitlement feelings also to suppress a lot of, other feelings that I have had from growing up. Like in the communist era, I was more lack, but I feel like I've really quickly turned that around by living in a society, even going to the US and being and imbibing that culture very rapidly. It's true, I still had my, constraints, but I could see how it was like a nice cover, like how it works as a cover over,
Right.
How
So
you
even though you weren't raised with that addiction, when it became available to you, you hooked right into it.
Yes, yeah. But I feel also at the same time I knew it wasn't giving me that pleasure,
You understood that it wasn't real pleasure,
Yes.
is what you're saying?
Yes.
You could understand that, like, walking a half an hour to the grocery store and meeting a friend unexpectedly, there was some real
Yes.
beauty in that. But going to the store and buying a bunch of clothes, you could tell that wasn't
Yeah.
isn't genuine or pure of it wasn't
Yes.
love. You could see it as a high. Okay, that's pretty self-aware.
I could see a lot of wrong. I could see a lot of things you couldn't close your eyes to. Like, for example, the fact that there's this oversupply of everything and how much people don't care and how sad people are in general. Even though they don't seem sad, you can tell by the way they, overeat, overbuy, just to cover over a lot of sadness, I feel.
Yeah.
And just this entitlement feeling, which is rage, made people just throw things on the street, Like there were parts of Philly I used to walk around and take photos of the rubbish. Just rubbish in like the poorer parts of Philly, because Philly is very strange. You get this like very like upper class street, and then the next street is ghetto, and you don't know where. If you're not local, you can get shot without even knowing. That's sort of the vibe I got from Philly at times, and it was really bizarre because at some times you'd have to go somewhere out of your reach. I didn't have a car, so public transport, catching trains or whatever. But sometimes I'd ended up in places where I was just shocked, like shocked at the amount of rubbish, like meters of rubbish against a fence, and I knew that was part of that societal entitlement to having things, but also not respecting things, just throwing things. That's what we do when we live in such societies where we don't really care that much for the environment at all, because we don't even care about ourselves really, And I feel like
That's profound, what you just said.
Yeah, well, when you think about how people live like that, when you're in an addiction of getting something to suppress how you feel, you really don't love yourself in that place. You want to overeat, you feel sick afterwards. I used to do that, so I know what it feels like to be like addicted to food, and that feeling of fullness. It's painful. Same with when you make a mess and you live in that mess, So I know the trends, I know the feelings that drive that sort of behavior, but it's very prominent in parts of, I found, in parts of the US, which I found surprising because I can understand it in a third world country, because there is no facilities to deal with the waste. It all gets dumped through the ocean. People used to just throw things on the ground because it was organic, banana leaf wraps for their food and stuff, and then it just transferred without any infrastructure made. Whereas US is a long-standing, powerful society that has municipal infrastructure, so that's why I sort of feel like, why is that? Always was baffled, but baffled, but so fascinated. I couldn't believe it. Literally, I've got like so many photos of rubbish just because it was like
so. You were quite interested in the rubbish. You felt like something was wrong, and that's why you wanted to document it. Yeah.
But it's part of like sort of my biological love of life,
Right.
Like I love nature,
so
for
all
me,
stuff is beautiful.
harming things like in that way feels wrong, and shocking. But those are some of the other things as well, which are under the entitlement sort of banner, is like the amount of excess use of resources. Like for example, heating. So heating is one. So Philly gets quite hot actually during summer. It gets like very, very hot. I don't know what it is in Fahrenheit, but people are like, oh, it's 100 degrees today. I just remember it was
so
very
maybe like
hot
around 40 Celsius sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. Really, really hot and very steamy. So, but every time you went into, to a train or a building like a university, it'd be so extremely cold.
You'd have to put on a sweater because your body's not used to it.
I literally used to have a jacket, and a jumper, and like not just. it was really freezing, you know. And the
Yeah,
opposite.
it'd be down to, I guess, like maybe like 22 Celsius in the
Yeah,
indoors, which is
yeah.
about 72 degrees
Yeah.
Fahrenheit.
It was,
Yeah,
it
which
just, yeah.
doesn't seem bad, but if you're coming from 100 degrees
Yes.
or 40 degrees Celsius, your body's shocked because your body does acclimate to different weather,
Absolutely.
right? But in America, yeah, the air conditioning is just
You don't get a chance to acclimate.
right. You're
You
just
know?
going from like a
Yeah.
walk-in freezer outside, you know,
Yeah, absolutely.
into the sweltering heat.
And I found that because I grew up once again where we had to, you know, get the coal from the cellar and bring it up really heavy and put it in the
Wow,
furnace.
so you could appreciate it because
I
you're putting your
appreciated
back-breaking work to get heat.
Yeah, you know, I watched my grandparents and my mum struggle with that. Like, and I'm not saying it was a good thing, but it was just the only way you could heat yourself. So, but then to see it being misused, and it is energetic cost, like it's energetic cost to the environment. So it's taking from the environment, you know, and people spend money on that. A lot of money is wasted as a result. And then it was the opposite. In winter, it was the same. Like it was just minus 12, I think, Celsius at times, really, really cold. And then you'd go into the university building and I had to literally take layers off from underneath my pants. You know, I'd wear like leggings. I'd have to. So I spent quite a bit of time dressing and undressing, I found, you know, when I lived in the US.
That's true. Yeah.
A lot of time because I'd get so hot that. And then outside I was actually really, really cold. So there was no, you had to, there was no like, and I don't understand where this is coming from, but I do feel once again, it's like, it is like a feeling like, well, we can, why wouldn't we? Let's just use the resource while we've got it.
Yeah,
It's
so we're going to have the
entitlement.
temperature the same year round instead of acclimating to the natural shifts in temperature.
Yeah.
Right, because we can. Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, people get sick as a result because your body can't acclimatize. So a lot of flus, like I remember sitting on the train thinking, like, no wonder everyone's coughing and sneezing, partly because of this, you know, body irregulation. Like, I think your body can only handle so much, you know, and you're stressed. And you're stressing yourself as a result and your body. So, you know, obviously people's emotions are more important when it comes to getting sick. But I could
is
just,
that true?
These parallels.
I didn't know if that was a wives' tale that you get sick because you go from cold into hot or hot into cold.
I just felt it was a stress on the body.
Yeah.
Like to me, you know,
it's certainly not natural, I suppose.
No.
But although I guess if you could go for like, I remember going on, I was in Central America and I went this long hike it was very hot and sweaty, and then I jumped into like a lake with a waterfall. And my sister said that the locals thought that was very bad because I would get sick because I was going from hot to cold. But that seems like a very natural way from go to hot to cold to plunge into a pool of water, right? Yeah,
and for, you know, minimal amount of time, the air temperature is still the same, and you'd get out.
That's true. The air
You're
temperature
not like
is still
exposed
the same.
to it for hours.
I'm not just staying underwater. I'm not snorkeling or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, that's interesting.
And I do believe that the whole thermal thing is probably an overkill. Or maybe it is
What
a
do you mean
wives'
thermal?
tale. As in, like, you know, being told like, oh, you're gonna catch a cold if you don't wear warm enough clothes and you go outside, and you know, all that sort of stuff. You know, just fear of our bodies actually being in uncomfortable settings.
Sure.
There's a lot. Like pollen was the same. Like it was like a big thing. Don't sit on the ground. You're gonna catch a cold. You know, like the whole cold thing was just like ridiculous.
Right.
In
So
Australia,
that's what I
people
sometimes
don't
like.
really
Is that a
care.
wives' tale or is that true?
Yeah, I don't know.
But it does seem unnatural
felt
to go
terrible.
from very hot to very cold, and you'd be for
Your
8
whole
hours.
body is like,
Right.
you know, and then you're going to go out again and you're going to put on the clothes. I just felt like, look, and I'm not saying, you know, we're always, like Poland was the same. We'd have heating and people heated their homes, but it was just a more sort of a pleasant temperature. And this was just like, it felt extreme to me, you know, and both ends, like both summer and winter. And I just feel like it really does come down to that sort of a feeling of, because we can, because, you know, we don't have to worry about the resources. Yeah.
It would be silly not to.
Yeah.
Like, why wouldn't you change the temperature to whatever you wanted?
Yeah. And the fact that it's imposed on you whether you like it or not is another. I was like,
well, when you're working,
like, how is this work? How does this work? Does everyone actually like this? I always wondered, you know, how people felt about it. I should have interviewed some people to find out.
I would always monitor whether people liked it or not with how many cardigans I saw on the back of desk chairs. Like wherever I went, I was like, oh, yep, they get cold. They get cold. Yeah.
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 Okay.
Yeah, so that's another sort of you know, like
entitlement.
Just something that I felt was of interest. These are I'm literally just telling you the things that I remember the most, that stuck out the most.
Yeah.
You know, yep. And I think I've covered all the ones that I could think of.
Okay, thank you for
the entitlement.
You're such a good guest doing research and really reflecting on this stuff. Okay. Okay, yeah, entitlement, and that's something we covered in my first episode. And
Yes.
I think it's probably the biggest unloving attitude in America. That's why I've started off with it,
Yeah.
entitlement, because it results in so much destruction, and it just no one thinks that they're entitled in the U.S. I mean, unless I mean, when I was in the U.S., I thought some of the people I met in L.A. were entitled, but I never thought I was. But I even when I hung out with people who were impoverished, there was still an entitlement there just because of the amount of abundance in America. So it's a big issue. So I'm glad that you brought it up. Yeah.
Yeah, it was pretty striking, at times, and I thought about it a lot because I guess I've got some ideas as to ideals as to how I want to live my life, not to imprint too much on the environment. And a lot of it comes out of my own fears of like not causing too much damage or whatever, but...
Or wasting too much energy.
Yeah, or wasting resources or wasting anything.
Right.
But at the same... And that's probably why the contrast was so big for me as well.
Oh my God, yeah. From growing up in a communist country to going to the U.S., I mean, it's night and day in terms of resources.
But emotionally, it's interesting because I find that a lot of people that came from Poland, when I grew up and I met a lot of Polish people,
In the U.S.?
In Australia.
In Australia, yeah.
I found that they imbibed very quickly the Australian way of lifestyle, and they wanted that whatever they thought was opulent. So they actually went even more so than Aussies. So I find that even though, I guess it's a different feeling driving that action. For Poland, it's more like we've been restricted, we didn't have enough, so now we're going to get it.
Right.
We deserve it now, we're entitled to this now because we've waited long enough, this feeling. Versus the Americans, which maybe had that in the past, I don't know around,
I think
how bad
before
it
World
was.
War II, there wasn't this amount of abundance,
Of course, and even the Depression time, the Dust Bowl and all of that. So people have been through tough times. But, then to create an empire that really then sucks the world dry as a result of that entitlement is another story, isn't it? And this is where the inequality comes in, and I feel that's something I really wanted to talk about as well, is inequality and racism.
Let's talk about it. Yeah, so you were living in Philly.
Yeah.
Large African-American population.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was your experience there?
So interestingly, I found it very, very interesting. I don't know why I've attracted some of these quite incredible, starking examples of, not examples, but more like incidences that happened, So first of all, I just remember that my ex-husband's auntie drove us to Philly to drop us off when we were going to get an apartment. We decided we had to move from New Jersey. We lived in Philly with his uncle for a little while, but outside of Philly, it was really hard to commute. So the best thing was to just move across the bridge from the university and just live in the city, basically, which it was wonderful. I really enjoyed Philly as a city. It's not it's not a giant city. It's quite a nice little small city.
It's not New York.
No, it was quite nice, and it's lovely. The buildings are nice.
Yeah,
it's
got
beautiful parks,
architecture.
It's lovely. So, anyway, I remember just getting dropped off in the middle of Philly, and we're just about to get out of the car, but we had a chat just before we said goodbye to his auntie, and she lives in a gated community in New Jersey. And she was locking, because I think I've already opened the car door to leave, she started locking the doors.
Yeah,
and I couldn't understand what she was doing, but she was really terrified that she was convinced that someone's gonna just come in and do something bad in the middle of the day,
And was she from Poland? I'm guessing if it was an auntie, or she
No, she was born in Australia. His grandfather,
Australia.
so her dad. America.
She was born in America.
Yeah, she was born in America. Yeah.
Okay.
So basically, her dad moved to America, ran away during the war, I think, from Poland.
Okay, so she was a second generation.
She was a second generation
person.
Polish person. Yeah. She didn't even really speak the language at all. She was very. But it was just showing me just how. Yeah, this sort of a gated community scenario as well. I just found that, this segregation of people. And I felt that particularly this feeling was black people are going to come and do something bad to me. That's the feeling.
Fear of black people.
And then I learned that this was the truth. I learned that ironically, I learned through African American people literally coming up to me on the street and zipping up 2 a.m. I'm coming home, and we lived opposite a nightclub, so it was like a.
Oh, so you were coming home late sometimes from doing work in the lab or whatever?
No, just went out with friends or whatever, just
So you're coming home
sat in
2
a
a.m. from the
cafe or a
club or
bar.
whatever. Yeah.
Coming home 2 a.m.
Yeah.
It's pretty late. It's time to go home, and I'd be crossing the street that I lived on, and an African American man would come up to me and close my bag, grab my zipper of my bag. I had this sort of a bag, like just a bag that you can fit a lot of things
Like
in,
a
over the
messenger
shoulder,
bag. Yeah.
over the shoulder hanging sort of a thing. And I'd have my water bottle in there, so just to give you how big it was, a jumper or whatever,
Right.
which is what you call a sweater. And he'd open it, he'd close it for me.
So a stranger came up to you and said, "You're not being safe. I'm going to help you out here and
He's
zip
saying
up
to
your
me,
bag."
he goes, do you see people like me? You got to be careful. This is not a place to have your bag open.
Do you see people like me? Wow.
Yes, he was
So it's kinda
basically
like
saying,
self-hating.
"I'm black. You got to be careful."
Yeah.
And it's so interesting because that's once that it happened. The second time it happened was a homeless lady. I used to go to this cafe to meet up with some friends, and there was this homeless lady, and she'd sometimes come and use the toilet, And she was the same. And I used to smile at her, like I just, I just naturally smiled at her, but. She just looked into my eyes once and walked straight up to me. She goes, "Do you see my face? Don't smile at people like this." Like
Again,
me.
the self-hate. Like she doesn't feel like
yes.
she deserves a smile.
This is what is really, really sad. I feel like there was this the belief wasn't just in the white population that there is a discrepancy in how people are treated based on their color, but the colored people themselves feel that it's true, and that white people, like naive
There's
white
an
people like me,
agreement.
there is an agreement, which I found very sad. Having those two incidences happen, I felt shocked by them.
Yeah, and they're so similar too.
Yes, from both male and female, and also
Was she black as well?
Yes, yeah. And there was these people that just broke my heart. I used to go to the gym in the morning, and sometimes it was dark still, so people would still be sleeping, and basically on the ground, in rows, people on cardboard boxes, just on the boxes.
So this is not something you saw in Poland or Australia growing up?
Not never, no. I've seen homeless people, in Australia, during the day, I never really saw any at night, but I didn't live in areas like cities where,
Didn't you live in Sydney?
I did, but not so much in the city itself.
You were in the suburbs.
Yeah, so I'm not sure how the cities. I think Australia hides their homeless a bit better.
What
in the US, at least, it's way more open.
Hide or house is one way to put it. Yeah, per capita, Australia has. The US has more homeless people overall. Obviously, it's a much bigger country. Australia has per capita actually a little bit more, but a lot of them are housed. So they're not technically homeless anymore, but they're in government, provided housing. You know what I mean? So you don't see as many people sleeping rough or sleeping on the streets.
Yeah. Whereas in Philly, it was terrible.
Yeah.
Really terrible. It was really heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Because I was like, oh my gosh, I get to go to the gym in the morning and jump over these people sleeping.
Yeah.
It was -12, degrees Celsius. It was freezing
you just
cold
feel
winter.
I feel like I would be so scary to sleep at night because that's when you're most vulnerable.
Yeah.
And you just have no walls around you.
Nothing.
I even sometimes don't even like sleeping in tents because I feel a little scared. Yeah. And
It's very sad. And I just do feel in general racism is prevalent in the US, in Australia as well. And it's probably more obvious there in a sense because you see, the African American population is large,
So you in Australia, is there racism against Aboriginal people?
Severe, yeah.
Is the population of Aboriginal people smaller than?
Oh, extremely little.
What percentage?
I don't know, but I just feel that it's very small.
Yeah, I don't see a lot of Aboriginal people.
No.
So I was like, I don't know if that's just because where I'm living or whatever. No. Okay, there's just not a lot.
There are, just they basically have been put into ghettos or concentration camps, just like they have done in the US.
Like Cherbourg?
Yeah. So, obviously populations in Redfern in Sydney, for example, it's a suburb in the city. I think now it's a upper class suburb, but when I was going to uni there, you kind of went, you saw a lot of Aboriginal people begging and asking you for money. But it's just this, it's a very big problem in Australia in the way that... Aboriginal people, especially in the communities, are treated. It's it's fourth world country you're going to. You're driving through, you can't even understand that that's the same country you just
When you're going into Aboriginal reservation,
Yes,
you mean?
or even areas where communities live, you know, it's quite depressing, really depressing. But
It's
in
like,
the US, I
sounds like
guess,
Native Americans.
yeah, that's probably what it would be like.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, that's another sort of a feeling that I get is this very, very racist sort of approach to the divisions. The divisions are great, you know, when it comes to racial divisions, and you can feel that in the you can feel the way people interact with you. And you know, another incident that I had, this is what really struck me as well. Like my heart just like opened up so much. I remember one day, the first time I ever had to catch a train from like the outskirts of Philly, like suburban Philly to Camden in you know, to get to through the city to New Jersey. And I was lost. Like the subway was so confusing. I had no idea what I was doing, how to get around. That was like, I was terrified. I was literally, I think I just stood there and cried in the end because I had no idea how to get a ticket and get by. Like, just like it was busy. I just remember being lost. And it was first a bus ride, like a long bus ride, and then a train ride. So, but I'm there trying to get a ticket. And once again, an African American person comes up to me and helps me, you know? Like, and that just started to like, I was like, wow, like, because you know, it's just, you're just nobody. Like no one should even see you in that mess that subways are.
Yeah,
You
and
know?
then this angel comes out because to me, there's nothing more terrifying to being lost in public transport in a foreign country. Like that's the way
At least I could speak English.
you speak English, but like it's just like you feel so like, what am I gonna do if the bus driver says this is the last stop? Like I'm kind of fucked here, you know, especially if there's no Uber or whatever, you know, or times before smartphones. And so.
And I remember just being, I'm going to be late for work, and I didn't, you know, my first day at work.
Oh,
my first
sure.
day
You
at
just
the lab,
freaking out.
I was freaking out as well. I always
so what
freak
did he
out.
just like
Not a
guide
good thing.
you?
He just helped me to buy a ticket in a
He
machine.
just helped you buy a ticket, right?
Yeah, he helped me to buy a ticket.
Oh.
You know, just these little incidences, and just it was just interesting. Just everything that I could see, you know. I could see that it's always that way, isn't it? I feel like a lot of people that are under like mind, I feel like where there's an inequality, and the people that are actually quite poorly treated are always the kindest, which I find, you know, you see that a lot in sort of American movies, like as well, you know, sort of some of those old films about, you know, slavery and stuff.
Right. Well, I guess it depends on how people decide to deal with their hurt. It's
true, because then you can
because
have
there's a
someone
lot of
shoot
people
you.
who are just fucking angry about
true.
how badly they've been
It's
treated,
true.
and I feel I've met
so
a lot
true.
of very angry African Americans in the U.S. because,
Yeah.
and I'm like, listen, I get it. Not that any anger is really justified, but if you get treated like you're less than everybody else because of the color of your skin.
And for generations, you know.
Right, you're going to have to work through a lot of anger
Yes.
before you can get to
Absolutely.
The soft place where you're kind to everybody, you know.
And it's funny that I had these experiences, you know. I don't quite understand why, but that's just what I got to have. So I'm like,
that's really
I might be a
beautiful.
little biased, you know, but I just feel, I think in general, I just didn't have this terror of you know, of them. And I think that's probably maybe why I attracted such experiences as well. Maybe they could feel in me that I wasn't a threat, or I wasn't, maybe I had some, you know, more compassion or some, you know, who knows what, we're emotional beings, there's interactions going on all the time.
Right.
So I've, you know, whatever was happening there at the time manifested
Well, it sounds
in
like,
these.
you know, maybe it's because you weren't indoctrinated in that culture, so you were coming from, you had that outsider's perspective. I feel like that when I moved from the north to the south in the U.S., it was just like, the people were just so overtly racist. I wasn't used to that, and I wasn't really used to seeing a lot of black people either, because I moved to Georgia, which is there's a lot more black people in Georgia than I think most any U.S. state, and it was I think that, and then the white people I met were just, a lot of them were just overtly racist because that was just the way it is, kind of thing. But then I ended up hanging out with a lot of black people, and I think it's because. Fortunately, I hadn't grown up in that. I kind of had more of a clean slate about the whole situation.
Yeah.
But I could see how it could go either way. If you have like a bad experience and you get mugged or whatever, and you just want to blame that on that.
Absolutely.
It's all black people are bad. You know, because when I met people who didn't, I met this guy and he didn't like black people, and he was talking to me about it, and was like, what is the deal? And he told me about, he got jumped by a group of guys and they were black. And I was like, this is the problem right here. This is where it originates, But he just decided that it was just all black people were like that. And so he wouldn't budge on it. You know what I mean? And I think that's how racism starts. And then
and also,
grows.
our upbringing, what we're taught about
Correct.
specific races, like in America, the black man is always the bad guy. Like, I don't know if you read, what's that guy's name? Do you remember that guy? He wrote that really cool book. I don't know what it's called. I've got it. He's like a famous writer. I think he did stuff on, I can't remember what it's called. It's so good though.
What's the book about?
The book is about the black guy always being the bad guy.
Oh, yeah, I don't know.
Oh, it's so good. I've got it if you want to
I've
borrow
noticed
it.
that's changed in the last 10, 15 years
Yeah.
in movies and media. But yeah, there's still, like, how much of that is genuine and it's just trying to,
Trying to overcompensate.
Right, or,
Yeah.
anyways.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's one of those things. And I also noticed, a lot, like, and I was telling you, about my ex's
Auntie?
auntie, this fear thing. And I remember there was only one American girl that I made good friends with because she was in my lab. Most
The
of
rest
the
of them
people
were
came
foreigners?
they all came from different, we called the concentration camp because our boss was German, I was Polish, and then there was a Jewish girl literally from Israel and Ukrainian girl.
Okay.
So we were literally, that's what
Not
people used to
politically
call
correct, Sandy.
us, and I was like, are you guys serious? They were like, yeah, and you guys literally are like the concentration camp because of the dynamics that were going on. So, it was funny, but it was...
Was he really, the supervisor, really harsh with you
a
guys?
woman, yeah.
Yeah, well, she was very
look,
harsh.
she wasn't, but there were certain things that people felt that might be the case. And it was quite... it was funny in the end, but it definitely, I could see why. Because we're all, just the way it turned out, but also some of the dynamics that played out. So, but there was an American girl as well, and I loved this girl, and she was very, very outgoing.
Do you know where she was from?
She was from New Jersey.
Okay.
Yeah. I forget her name.
Local girl.
Yeah, she was so expressive and honest, and but she was so terrified as well, like, and very just hyper vigilant, had mace in her bag, and I understand because it is quite dangerous. Rutgers University, you couldn't walk around Camden. You had to be escorted past a certain hour by security, so you couldn't just stay around campus when you wanted to, up to times. There were times where everyone had to leave. And if you didn't, say, because you had an experiment going, sometimes you had to call security, But I think there's like this hyper-vigilant level of fear as well. And this is probably partly what causes the entitlement, It's like...
I'm entitled to all this food. I'm entitled to this gated community because there's a reason for my fear. My fear is valid. So, of course, I should have all of this extra security.
Or that people are going to attack me, so I should, have the right to kill them, have a gun.
Or I feel really uncomfortable, so I have the right to overeat.
Yeah. Yep. Lots of things, like guns, I met a guy, that's later when I traveled the US a bit, just on like a tour thing, but we got to meet some of the guides, like friends and stuff. I went to their homes and stuff with him, and, so like one of this 18-year-old man, I think he was Filipino, just came back from Iraq, so traumatized to the max.
So
and
he's a veteran,
he had a gun in his house. He came and like showed me the gun, and I just got to hold this gun going like, I don't get it. So you just went and shot a bunch of people in Iraq, and then you still okay with having a gun to defend yourself. Like, I couldn't understand, but I guess that's how it is. You're traumatized. That's what we do. We use our trauma as an excuse for further violence, or potential.
He thought that saved him, maybe using violence in Iraq. So do the same thing in the U.S. Yeah. I mean, it's not shocking to me.
No, it's not. No.
Unfortunately, knowing people who have guns, and it makes them feel safe.
Yeah, which is the opposite, because most people get shot because they have a gun. Do you know what I mean? Like it's like another Band-Aid effect, or another. It's like a point that I think is the most pertinent point that I want to get to, is this kind of a spiritual an issue where we justify killing of others Because when we have a gun, we expect it, like it's an expectation that you're going to use it at some point. You wouldn't
Right, it's
otherwise
not
get
like
it.
a knife where you could use a knife for actually good things like cutting up vegetables. A gun's only purpose is to hurt
To
somebody.
kill someone, exactly. And I find that very disturbing, you know. I find that very disturbing that any society is allowed to use a gun, and it's another entitled feeling to avoid having to acknowledge that we have fear, you know, or work through the fear so we don't have to have a gun, you know. And I find that, and look, I've had similar feelings in my life as well. I always thought I never actually did it, but I've always thought about it at the back of my sort of, you know, somewhere inside of me there was this feeling like I should have scissors or a knife next to my bedroom in case someone comes to rape me, you know. I had these thoughts. I never actually did it, but that's the kind of like that I should.
You still
should
had that
have
emotion to do it.
that
Yeah,
I would,
so.
that I would defend myself if it came to the crunch. That I would have to defend myself,
Right.
you know.
And for viewers who aren't familiar, in Divine Truth, there's this kind of this concept that even if you don't act on certain impulses, it's still a sin to have, like, for example, it's not that different from if I wanted to. I've thought about having a gun and I'd feel safe having a gun, but I never pulled the trigger on buying one because I didn't want to be. I didn't like the way I'd be perceived, or I was scared of it. It's still an unloving feeling to have, even though I haven't acted on it, as compared to somebody who actually did go and buy a gun. And there's not much difference between me and that person.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, it's almost like I used to think about it this way, like a lot of people are murderers, but they just haven't acted upon it.
Right.
But given the opportunity,
if people thought they could
might.
get away with murder, there would be a lot more murdering going on.
Yeah.
The only thing that stops people from murdering is
the threat of
the law.
That's right.
Right.
The threat of being jailed.
But in our hearts, a lot of us are murderers.
That's right.
I think about that with myself. In my 20s, I always had a feeling that if I got pregnant, I would definitely abort the baby. So I would murder somebody. And so in my heart, even though it never actually happened, in my heart, murderous feelings.
Yeah.
So I'm not that different from somebody who actually did have an abortion.
Yeah, exactly. I'm the same, you know.
That blew my mind when I first heard that in Divine Truth. I was like, wait, there's a huge difference between those two people, the person who acts and the person who doesn't act. But in God's eyes,
heart.
I guess there's not. I don't know. It's not something I really understand.
I guess it's the power of
heart.
intention, you know, like when we say like, because intention is like a desire that's going to be willed into action at some point, you know, and it's that threat of that fruition of that desire, you know. It's like
still
that
a vibe,
intention.
and vibes.
Yeah, it's a belief system.
It still has a lot of influence on other people. And I'm not saying act on your. You should, if you have a horrible impulse to do something bad, it's better not to act on it for sure. Because then,
even if you do have a gun and someone comes to you in your house and you're like, well, no, actually my morals are like, I do have a gun, but I'm not going to use it.
Yeah, in that moment, you're like, whoa, actually, now that I'm, the rubber meets the road and I'm in that situation, I would never want to take another person's life. That's a good thing to stop yourself. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
We're just saying that even if you don't act on those things and you have those feelings, it's still something to be addressed.
Yes. Even though I do agree, I mean, obviously killing someone versus having a gun in your house is a big difference, but at the same time, it's when you look at like, what if this other thing, the situation came about, what would you do? You know?
I think about that a lot because like if I was backed into a corner, I feel like I would be violent towards somebody. I would love to think that I would just turn the other cheek and like go into a fetal or something, but I have a feeling I would fight.
And and I think that's nice and honest because I think like, honestly, I think majority of people don't want to admit just the level of violence that we have inside of us, you know. We don't want to even go there.
And the more afraid we are of our feelings, the more entitled we feel to not have our feelings, I think the more violent we are going to be, right?
Yeah. Because then we go into a panic state and spirits get involved, all kinds of things happen. We do become, it's funny, people like fear emotions, we fear emotions, but when people are sort of suppressing their emotions, that's when they're most unstable and most volatile emotionally, you know. That's why people just freak out and do silly things, and it's like, well, that's a result of our lack of general humility, like just generally not wanting to be ourselves and express what's inside of us, you know, and lots of lying to ourselves about who we think we are, you know. Often, I get shocked at times looking at what's inside of me and like how much I believed like I would have never even believed that that's actually inside of me. Do you know what I mean? That a particular belief or a particular feeling is inside of me.
You mean like when you actually break down and cry about something, you're like, oh my God, this whole time that I
Yes.
thought that I was a
Yes.
good person by punishing myself.
Perfect
for
example.
Yes.
Perfect example, because that's exactly kind of what brought me to the next topic that I
Yes.
feel passionate about covering. Because I
Yes.
was reflecting upon it straight after this realization of, you know, that I use self-punishment as a method to get away from all of my feelings.
Right.
But also,
it's very Catholic of you.
that's right. And I also realized, why am I doing this? Like, and I had no idea until I actually felt that the reason for it, or, you know, the real reason for it, which I never really understood before. Strangely enough, even though people have been telling me I've been self-punishing, all my friends have told me, you know, whether people listen to Divine Truth or not, they're always like, you're so harsh with yourself. You're
I said
always
that
blaming
45
yourself for
minutes ago to
everything.
you. Yes,
you know,
it's very
constant.
obvious.
It's very
But
obvious.
Also, it's easy to see other people's issues,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
And it's, you know, and also like just being told in all kinds of ways, and how this is it's a sin because it's an avoidance of God's truth, as God, you know, defines missing the mark of love. You know, we're not,
not
being
loving
loving.
yourself, right.
I'm not being loving to myself. I'm harming myself, but I'm also demanding of others in that space
To reassure you, oh, you're not that bad, Sandy. You're
yeah,
a good person,
take
Sandy.
me
Yeah.
a late, like, you know, please help me to take away these feelings. But what I've realized was that that's my belief in what God expects of me, that being obedient means to self-punish. And that was a big realization for myself, you know. And it led me to think about more about as well, like 60% of, probably 50 now, just from what I read recently, but, you know, between 60 and 50% of Americans are religious people.
Oh, I think it's probably more than... Yeah, and even if they don't attend church, it's just in the air that you breathe in the U.S. It's a Christian nation. Its foundation is Christian, even more so than Australia.
Absolutely. And when
Yeah.
you think about it, like this whole, even the US elections at the moment, I just watched, I wanted to see what the nominee, one of the nominees, what's her name? What's the lady?
Jill Stein, Kamala Harris.
Yeah, I looked at Kamala because I was interested, and you know, and I don't normally follow any type of politics, but there's this always this like God bless America in everything, right?
Correct.
And then I'm thinking, what kind of a God does America believe in? Because I, for myself, as a Catholic, believe in a punishing God, even though I listen to Divine Truth, and Jesus is always telling us how good and wonderful God is, and I can see God's work in nature, how wonderful, quirky, fascinating, fun.
Quirky. You're right. It totally
God
is
is
quirky.
quirky. The creatures God makes are just the most coolest things ever. Like they literally just melt my heart, and I just feel like this cuteness, and they're all adorable to me. You know, people say, "Oh, this spider is so ugly," and to me, it's just an adorable God's creature.
That's true. I look at like gross like insects and I show you and you, gosh.
But, you know, okay, and then there's this discrepancy between that and the God that wants me to self-punish and self-flagellate.
Right.
Because God is wrathful and expects that of me, you know. I
Right,
can
so-
never reconcile those two gods.
The former is something pure and good that's true about God, and
That is love,
the latter is
obviously,
something
you know.
that
Yes.
you're raised with. It's not God.
And I see...
Supposedly. I also feel like you that God is a punishing God. And I think that all Christians are going to feel that way.
That's what I
read the
think.
Old Testament.
That's right. That's right. And I want to do a whole, like literally I'm going to make a whole like video series on that, you know.
Oh, really? Oh,
Yeah,
please
that's
cover
like one of
Job.
my-
I would love to hear you talk about Job.
Oh, I don't even know anything about the Bible. More about...
Oh, you don't?
No, I need to learn all this stuff. But
Oh, okay.
to be honest, just the...
But wait, didn't you go to church growing up?
I know, but I don't remember being taught, like, I don't remember I don't even remember understanding anything that was really said. Up until 10, I went to church, you know, in Poland. But I think Catholicism doesn't really... It was more the ritualistic side of stuff. I
Right,
think
you
I
just
just
go
blurred
in,
out
you listen to other people
a lot
talk.
of this.
Right.
Yeah, when the priest talked, I think I was just bored.
You weren't going to Bible study like the Protestant,
No,
like
we
at
went,
your friend's house.
we kind of went to like religious... We had to go to religion classes, you know. But the bottom line is, to me, it feels like America says, God save America, you know.
God bless America.
God bless America and save America too, you know, when it goes to war, you know. And it's like, what kind of a God do people believe in? Because to me, it feels like the God we've been taught to believe, whether you're American or Polish Catholic or whatever, is this wrathful, punishing God,
Right.
because you're willing to go to war and believe that God is going to be on your side. You know, this is I think this is like a fundamental spiritual problem in all societies, but particularly enough I feel in America, because of this very like there's no way an Australian politician will say God bless Australia.
They wouldn't?
No
I
way.
know, America's so Christian.
No, even Poland doesn't. They don't
America's
really
so
talk about God.
Christian.
It's Christian, but in a really weird way. It's like, it's just like you just say stuff like saying bless you or
We wouldn't
how
have
are you?
We wouldn't have an atheist president in America.
Oh really?
Oh,
Isn't
no.
Trump atheist? You'd expect that Trump would be.
Trump says that he believes in God.
Oh,
He says,
gosh.
yeah.
What kind of God does Trump believe in?
I
So
don't
I
know.
think we need to like, well, this is where I feel like it's so like interesting, because I thought about this morning. I was like, what kind of a God do people believe in? Because the way that the behavior of any Western nation is, you know, we're talking about America in this case, is like, let's go to war. People are out there to get us. These are the beliefs. Let's rape and exploit as long as we can be warm and cold when we need to be, you know what I mean, with air conditioning and everything. Let's exploit, you know, I don't know, China for the clothes that it makes, you know what I mean, like as cheap as possible, so we can feel better about ourselves in some way. All of these things, it just shows me the kind of God we believe in, you know. And it really is disturbing to me, because that means we're basically saying that that's what God is, you know. Through our own actions, this is what I'm starting to see in myself. I use self-punishment because that's the kind of God I believe in. You know, I believe God demands that of me, which is completely untrue and against God's laws, because it's cruel to oneself. And it's just like, I really thought, wow, like, so there's this supposedly religious country, you know, but it acts in these ways. So what are the flaws? Like, where did it all go wrong?
So instead
You
instead of people largely in America being self-punishing, it's more this idea that God is a parent who will give you what you want when you want it.
That's the kind of God Americans believe. And
It kind of reminds me of people would that line in Genesis of the Bible. I guess you wouldn't know, but that God gave Adam and Eve dominion over the
I know
land.
that line, yes.
And
Yes.
People have interpreted that not as, you know, Adam and Eve were God's highest creation, but that Adam and Eve could do whatever they wanted to the environment, to the animals. Yeah,
entitlement.
Exactly.
So once again, just there, right there in that first line of the Genesis, it's like, do you know what I mean? It's
I
kind
don't
of
think
like,
I got that quote word for word. So
I
don't
do
come for
remember
me, people,
the dominion. I remember the dominion.
Yeah. That's the vibe.
People think that they should eat animals because God gave us dominion over
yes,
animals.
and you can eat anything with a cloven hoof because it says so in the Bible.
Yeah,
And,
So all of these things, and
So I think those two things can coexist too, because you can meet, most Christians do have a self-punishing feeling. Otherwise, they wouldn't overeat, they wouldn't smoke, they wouldn't drink, right? But they also have this feeling that they should get whatever they want.
Yeah.
So
and
the
I don't
two
even
things
know,
can coexist.
and I don't even know whether it was just a specific Catholic thing in Poland, and in my specific, I think Catholicism in general is very about self-flagellation, self-punishment, but not necessarily other Christian religions.
I feel like it's Protestants are less self-punishing than Catholics.
Yeah. So I think I'm not even, it's not like I'm just using that as an example. Like, this is the God I believe in. I will self-punish.
Right.
And I'm just using that as an example of, and a question, what kind of a God do people believe in America? 60% or 50%, I think I just read before, just when you were like setting up the computer, is like, well, what kind of a God do you believe in? It's a question to ask yourself. What sort of spiritual beliefs do you actually have? Because if we're willing to go to war, if we're willing to be racist, if we're willing to do all these things that clearly show an unhealthy attitude towards our brothers and sisters, we obviously must believe that that's what our God is a representation of. Or
at least he's putting a stamp of approval on it.
Yeah.
I mean, and this has been going on throughout human history. I mean, the Crusades, that was the war literally in the name of God.
Yeah. And this is what I think, because God is the overarching goodness and love and lawmaker of this universe that we live in, as long as we live outside of those laws, and I'm learning this,
You can't live outside the laws, but as long as you break the laws, you mean?
Yeah, we're going to be suffering. We're going to be always living in that sort of, the entitlement, the fear, all those things we've talked about. It's like we are going to live by those, and that's going to mean forever raping and pillaging, and the earth can only sustain so much of that, And I feel like Australia, honestly, is no better. Like, there are some maybe more, there are more restraints, like we don't all just have guns, and most of us say we don't want war, we still put a lot of resources into war and into armies and into, military. And so I think it's just I really do think, even honestly, it's just a blanket Western way of life, and we all aspire to be like America. Poland aspires to be like America. When the markets opened after communism, everything was on the shelf. I was shocked. I didn't go for like 9 years, from like 1990 to 1999 or 2000, I think. The shock that I had of a Poland that once was this sort of oppressed but also frugal and minimalistic country. Simple,
in an endearing way. I say simple and endearing way.
Sometimes, yeah, absolutely. I found it very, very good,
I love the idea of someone just showing up at your doorstep, like...
Yeah, just knock on the door, and you may choose to answer, or you may not.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
That's such a busy lifestyle.
Very different lifestyle. But then going towards this, like, we want what the US has, and let's face it, the rest of the world looks up to the US.
Why can't we be spoiled like the US is?
Yeah.
Right.
And then we can't blame, because people keep talking about this overpopulation, Africans have to stop breeding, and in India as well. It's like, dude, like, these people have had...
They have a way smaller carbon footprint if they have 5 children than
and the children are likely to die before, the age of whatever it is. There's like a certain age that people were always going by, I think 5 or something. So they were having children not because for the sake of having children. It was for the sake of, most of them will die by a certain age, Like, if you understand, and also, like, why, even if it is just children, and I'm not saying it's a good thing, but why deprive people of that rather than deprive ourselves of having 3 cars in a family, These are the sort of dichotomies that I find so hard to, when I talk to people about these things, because I have these conversations a lot with other friends, and I just can't, because people have this thing, that overpopulation, that really strikes me. Like us in the Western world saying that, that other nations should curb their growth, while we're raping and pillaging those countries, and their children are starving, so they're having more of them.
I wonder what it was like. I always think about, what was it like in China under the one-child rule? That must have been...
I wonder how many abortions must have happened.
It must have been a horrible... Yeah. Oh, a lot of abortions must have happened.
Yeah.
A lot.
Yeah. It's a very, very sick world we're living, and I do believe that the only thing that's going to fix it is God's love, and I see how difficult it is to actually get to a condition to receive this love. So I see how much struggle we're going to have, how much struggle we're going to have.
Do you think it's more of a struggle for people in the Western world because we've got so many of our emotional addictions are met than somebody who's in, for lack of a better word, the third world?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay.
I do.
I
do, because I feel like when you're the oppressor, and I have been an oppressor, I feel that it is way more difficult to see and work through the sin because of entitlement feelings. When we have entitled feelings, we feel like, why? Like, this is my right to do what I'm doing.
Right, and I feel like for most people, it's a lot easier to deal with hurt of being attacked and hurt themselves, as opposed to looking at yourself and realize that you've attacked and hurt other people yourself. That's something that most people don't want to admit to. A lot of people admit to, oh, I was treated badly by so-and-so. But it's more rare to see somebody who would admit when they're treating other people badly.
Absolutely. And as you know, all of God's truth and the way to receive divine love is to actually see our own sin, not the sin of others, you know. And it is difficult, and it is hard, and it is, but it just requires a lot of, I suppose, first of all, understanding the kind of God that we believe in the first place, because that's my biggest problem all the time. I always come to this. It's like, wow, because, I've lived my life going against that Catholic upbringing that I believed I was just angry at it, but I didn't even realize that it's completely drives my life still. And while we're, look at how we've been raised and the attitudes we've been raised with, even if it's non-religious attitudes, that's those,
How our parents treated us, we're going to think God's like that.
yeah, but also like, those things like entitlement, fear, what else was it that, that all of those, that how have we been taught those things, So we don't have to go, I'm just bad because I'm American. Do you know what I mean? It's like, well, wait a second, like, why am I like this? Am I like this? Do I have this attitude?
Exactly. This isn't a place, the podcast, that's what I keep trying to drive home with the podcast, is that this isn't a place where we're going to bash Americans. This is a place where we're going to say, hey, what's going on with America? Like, there's a lot of unhappy people there. There's a lot of unhappy people as a result of what Americans do outside of America. Like, how do we solve this? Not let's beat up on ourselves about it.
And America's got really great sort of the Constitution and all those things that
There's
happen
a lot
in the
of
past.
really cool things that are great about America.
And I don't really
think.
know the Constitution, but it just reminds me of the forefathers of
the founding fathers.
The founding fathers, and I keep reading about them in the Padgett messages. If I don't know if you've ever introduced.
Oh, really? Are they in the Padgett messages?
Yeah.
Well, George Washington is. Who else?
I think Lincoln as well.
Oh, yep, Lincoln.
And
not Ben Franklin. That guy was dark.
Which one?
Ben Franklin.
Oh, was
your boy
he?
Philly. Yeah, I don't know. He was part of some like secret society.
Oh, really? I used to love him because he invented so many things.
I think he was quite. He
might be a celestial angel now.
He probably is, because
Yeah.
he seemed like he was very curious about the world. I mean, he
invented
discovered electricity. I mean, he wasn't probably the first.
So
but I think he was a philanderer. Like he liked to party. He liked to party, so you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know the character of any of these guys, obviously, when they were on Earth.
No.
But now
most of them own slaves, so there's that. You got to work through that as well. Yeah.
And and these guys now are like celestial angels, So I just kind of feel like whenever I read about it, I think about America and where it's gone and and where everyone can get up to.
I always wonder if it's true that George Washington never told a lie, which is probably not true, but it sounds like he's probably a pretty honest guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, because no one comes up with that mythology about you if you lie a lot.
Yeah,
that'd be really cool. And
really
Lincoln seems like, Lincoln made some brave choices to end slavery, and he got killed.
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
yeah.
I've
always had mad respect for him.
That would have really landed him in a good place in the spirit world. Standing up for, loving others. And
he seemed very
truth.
sad too. Like he wasn't like some happy dude.
Look, I don't know anything about these guys, but when I do read the Padgett messages and these guys come up, I'm always thinking about the US, And I don't know, like...
Well, Padgett messages, for all of you guys who don't know, they were messages that were channeled by a man in Baltimore, a U.S. citizen at the beginning of the 20th century.
A lawyer, yeah.
Yeah.
James
And
Padgett. Very nice messages. They're about Jesus basically being channeled through James and Jesus and all his celestial friends.
And then just random people like Napoleon.
Yeah.
Or
Caesar.
Grover Cleveland, another lesser known American president.
Yep, just read about him the other day.
Yeah. He did not end up in as good of a place as he thought. He realized that most of his life was about vanity, and that he didn't really understand what true spirituality was about. And, I found him quite candid.
Yeah, but very good. It was really, Jesus used Padgett really as a medium to basically correct all those errors that are in the Bible, particularly about Jesus' blood being the saving grace for humanity.
Which it is not.
Exactly, and how God's love and receiving divine love does that.
That's the true rebirth.
Yes, and this is exactly what Jesus is back on earth teaching us now. And, and I think, but the only thing, I suppose, is like looking at all those sinful things, like we're just missing the mark of love, as we've been discussing in the past hour or so, and, just looking at those seriously, and just so we can even if it is for the sake of like, wow, I'm so unhappy, just recognizing that we are unhappy in all this excess food, excess
But I think in the Western society, you can convince yourself you're not happy because you have all the TV you could ever want to watch, you have all the food you could ever want to eat. You can distract yourself a lot easier. Like we were talking about earlier, it's harder for Westerners to change, right? Because
they have those things.
Yes.
And yet, how many of us can we say we're the most unhealthy we've ever been? All these cancers, all these like the world is most destroyed it's ever been. Like we know we're not happy. We cannot be, you know. And it's just like, and I think honestly, living
Right.
in the
Look at all the amount of antidepressants people are on.
That's right.
Right.
You know, we're heavily medicated. You know, there's so many wrongs, so much pain and suffering in this world, so many wars, all these things. But it's funny because it's like, I think, to be honest with you, I think when I lived in the US, it really, like, I changed my life after that.
Really?
Because these things that I'm talking about now, they were so exacerbated. Like, it was so exacerbated seeing how these things don't make me happy, like the opulence,
retail therapy.
all these things. I was just like, I was so unhappy, and I ended up.
You're like, even when I'm had got the golden cow of America and all of the riches that came with it, I'm still not happy. So those things actually don't make me happy.
Yeah, and I guess because I had little then as well, because you know there was hardly any furniture. I lived in a 1-bedroom unit, so like
with your husband.
It was literally it wasn't even a bedroom. It was just
a studio.
It was a studio, a tiny little studio.
Or they call it
and
a
we
bed
didn't
sit.
we didn't even need anything else because you know, like except for heating, didn't have heating, which was horrible.
Ooh, there's no heating.
Yeah, we had this little heater,
like an
electric heater, but it was cost so much money because there was no double glazed windows. We lived on the 6th floor. I used to freeze, and I didn't even know about the hot water bottle. I've discovered that way too late.
Oh, I'm so glad I found out about that. Because you didn't have that in Poland?
No,
I guess it's a British thing, and that's why Aussies embraced it.
I didn't even know, but that is a great
invention. Every
invention.
British person I met knows about that. It's not a big thing in America. People use electric blankets, of course, because of course you can use more energy.
Oh, I wish I would have known. I was piling on,
cuddling up to your husband.
So many things I was doing, like eating breakfast in with a little, like an electric fan heater in the bathroom because there's no windows, so you could just sit there. Like, it was ridiculous. It was it was 4 degrees in the fridge. 4.5, I think the fridge was.
Celsius?
Yeah, and 4 in the room. So it was colder in the room than in the fridge.
That'd probably be around 4 degrees. Would probably be around.
I don't know how many degrees.
Upper 30s. Yeah. Fahrenheit. Yeah.
But
just above freezing.
But that's beside the point. Okay, so I didn't.
So you could see your breath sometimes.
Yeah, it was really cold. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I didn't look. That was my own choice. That I just thought, no, I'm not spending money on this because this is ridiculous. The way that this particular apartment was heated. But what it made me realize, I went traveling like around Central America afterwards, and it just changed my life because I was like like being in nature and just going to villages and like being in a completely different country. We can't speak the language. All of those challenges. It just made me like I yearned for simplifying my life.
Yeah.
I yearned to get out of the city.
Central Americans, man. I don't know where you were, but my vibe with them, because I've traveled in Central America, is they're just way more generous. They're way less
happier
arrogant.
People.
Yeah, happier people. Even though they don't have much,
right.
but if they've got 2 of something, they'll give you 1.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah, very different. Such a big contrast going. I was traveling for 4 months or 5 months afterwards.
In Central America?
Yeah. So, mostly Guatemala.
Oh, Guatemala,
bit
I've
of
been
Mexico.
there.
Yeah. Just like being there and just seeing how much I didn't want my life the way, like the oppressive life of drugs and drinking anymore. I think I gave up alcohol when I lived in the US, actually. That was
really?
From like every weekend drinking since I was 14. Like, I don't know, being there, it just somehow, maybe sometimes when you're away from home, in a foreign country.
You can get a new perspective, can't you?
You get such a new perspective, and then going to this extreme other perspective, maybe not so extreme, but yeah, Guatemala's pretty poor.
Yeah.
Guatemala's pretty...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, very different to the American lifestyle. Very different. And I think this is the saddest thing, like we live in these lies of I'm important, I should get what I want, I should be able to suppress all my feelings and dump them onto others.
This is what I'm dealing with. I have still huge entitlement not to feel, and I feel like this is something. Well, no, I don't feel it. This is what Jesus has told me, is that it's going to be a struggle for all Americans to feel, because in America there's this feeling that everybody should feel comfortable. So when you give up entitlement, or you at least try to go through the motions of giving up entitlement, you're going to feel uncomfortable right away. Yeah.
And and I think what we discussed with even with the heating and cooling.
Yes,
that's just like a physical example of that, right?
Yes.
And I think I heard you talk in your other podcasts about how the niceties, the facade of hi, how are you, and the expectation of that question and also that answer of always being good,
Yeah.
It's like we're not even
cheery
allowed to,
facade.
we're not even allowed to go, no, I'm actually not good today, or
Right.
you're then seen as some depressed. Well,
I still have a problem with that. I ran
Yeah.
into our mutual friend of ours who, is somebody who encourages us to be real. And he asked me how I was, and I was like, I've been better. But the real answer was, I feel fucking terrible. But I could realize I still self-censor. And I can see that, it comes from my upbringing.
Yeah, and I think, and what I also would encourage people in the US
please.
with is like, you're such an exemplary country that everyone looks up to, You are people that people are envious of, sort of, I suppose it is the facade of America.
The American dream.
Yeah, exactly. But at the same time, people look up to this leading country that is big and powerful. Imagine if people became lawful, and I want to mean lawful as in God's laws.
Oh my God! I mean,
and God's love existed in America on a large scale.
If we could reverse what America's doing and put that energy into doing the right thing, I mean, it'd be incredible.
Yeah, and there's many, many examples of good things happening, I'm sure of it.
Yeah, well, of course, yeah.
And so imagine if this was done according to God's way, the way God intends us to live, I think. And I'm not saying that, obviously, I've got to do it myself before saying that to someone else. But I'm like, sometimes I've got these feelings of like, imagine if like people did this, the world would heal very rapidly. We would heal the world really, really rapidly. Because we would all want love and goodness and truth, and we would all want to just be respectful of the environment, we'd be respectful of each other, we would be happier, we wouldn't need to medicate, we wouldn't need to overeat, we wouldn't need to overexploit resources, because we would be happy with just what we have with God's love and each other, And I think, wow, what a potential that is, what a fabulous future we could have. And sometimes I believe that future is actually possible. Majority of the time not, but I will never give up the hope on some level somewhere, or at least attempt to make that a reality for myself within my own heart, on some level.
That's beautiful.
It's very difficult, but it's, there are times where I see the potential of, or the possibility of it. There are times when I'm not, just depends on the state I'm in, but yeah.
That's really eloquently put. I just like listening to you talk, Sandra. I should have interviewed you before.
We can always have all kinds of chats.
All right, hot take. Do you think it's possible that any of the founding fathers of America had God's love in their heart? I wonder.
Before they passed?
Yeah.
Very likely, yeah.
Yeah. Because it must have been a hard time, like, splitting from England. That must have been a scary, brave choice to make.
And to be honest, I don't know anything about these guys' characters or anything.
Again, most of them owned slaves, so there's that.
And most of them, would have. But like, that's pretty amazing for Lincoln to have, if he did have slaves as well.
Oh, I don't know. I'm sorry. Founding fathers are the people from the late 1700s.
Yeah. I don't know.
Lincoln was about 100 years later. So he was like 1860s.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I don't think Lincoln probably didn't.
Who were the founding fathers? So
Washington, James Madison, Ben Franklin, John Adams, John Hancock, Thomas Jefferson.
Oh yeah.
Thomas Jefferson. Yeah.
I don't know, but it's I don't know. I don't know if they did.
Well, Thomas Jefferson did. George Washington did. Yeah.
But there's even like there are people receiving God's love all over the world. Like there is.
Well, and people you don't have to be a good person to receive God's love as well. Obviously.
And you don't have to be Christian, and you can be. Yeah. You can be out there in nature watching a sunset, and you're communicating with God,
right.
and that's the beautiful thing. Like that.
God is not bound by religion, people.
No, and the religious beliefs I believe, and I can see within myself, are the biggest blocks to actually who God is and the reality of God and truth about God. I'm finding it a deep struggle, and I had no idea that I honestly always think, surely I'm over this by now. It's like, no, this runs deep in my veins and deep in my soul. Yeah, very, very sad.
Yeah,
and very
the Catholic Church. Yeah,
it's a really.
It's got a dark history.
It's a very dark cult. Yeah.
History.
And you know what? Like, that's another thing is like the angrier I became, the further away I got away from myself. The angrier.
So were you an angry ex-Catholic at one point?
Yeah. Well, up until literally like, I wouldn't even say that I'm not angry anymore, but up until maybe a year or two ago, maybe a year, I was enraged. And then I realized, that's when I realized, what do I really believe about God? And then I realized, oh my gosh, everything inside of me is what I grew up with.
Right, even though you're new, different, you feel like you're different now. You were about to be a Buddhist nun. Yeah, you're into divine truth now. So I'm so different from a Catholic, right?
Because what I couldn't understand was why and how did I not get this divine truth stuff?
Okay, this is inspiring to me because this is where I'm at right now, where I'm like, I don't really get this stuff. Like I'm not getting this stuff.
I never got it.
It all sounds nice.
Years.
Yeah,
14 years or something, you know?
Yeah.
Hang on. Yeah, 14 years.
And it's like, we got to be real with where we're really at.
Because I was like, Jesus talks about this amazing God, right? He describes God in such beautiful, realistic, scientific ways, right? I can feel how wonderful God is, just him talking about God, right? But then I'm like, but I don't want this character in my life. Like, what is wrong with me?
When I go home, I'm thinking, yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
I feel like God's going to be a punishing dad, basically.
But I didn't even allow myself to go there. I would just be so in denial with my rage.
You wouldn't even have that thought?
Yeah, no.
Oh, okay.
I would be in such denial about it.
I have that thought all the time. I'm like, I don't want God in my life. Yeah.
Honestly, to me, like, I've done that beforehand. I was like consciously made
when you're a rebel and you're like, I'm an atheist now or a Buddhist now.
Yeah. Age of 12, we came to Australia. My mum and I were like, right, we're never going to church again.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. We were like escaped from our oppressive grandparents, her parents, you know. We were like totally against it. We were like we're like, no, like this was all wrong, but we just sort of survived in it, you know, sort of a feeling.
Right.
But, and that's what you think. You think you're running away from it. You think, oh, your beliefs are they weren't even there. You don't even know that they existed. Like, I literally was convinced that because I've hated it and because I've turned away from it and because I ran away and because I cut my ties with any punishing God that I originally believed in, that it's all gone. That's all I had to do.
You anymore.
You know? And then it affects my whole life. I mean, I'm truly like, I literally, all those beliefs run my life. And, you know, they are very, very sad and full of sorrow because now I have to face the fact that that's what I believe God to be. You know, this wrathful, punishing, you know, person that wants me to self-punish, like all these horrible things. And they're not true, and that's what hurts. I think that's what the pain is that these, not only did I live my life, but these really, really sad beliefs, but also the fact is that I treat God as if God is that, you know, and God is nothing like that. And I can't really learn what really God is like unless I release these feelings inside of me. And that is really, really difficult because first of all, I didn't even want to know or acknowledge that fact, you know, the denial is so strong. And then now having to face it all and then having to feel like lost, you know.
Well, I look forward to when you start sharing about you said you're going to do some sharing about this perspective of God as being punishing and
just about the Catholic upbringing and how much how religious beliefs that are inculcated into a child, how much damage they cause when you actually want to have a relationship with God in the end.
They could cause damage, right?
Yeah,
it's a mixed bag. It could be a mixed bag, right? Because some people, I feel, although I used to just think, oh, it sucks that I grew up a Christian, but then I've come to believe there's been some really good parts about it because it's like it gave me a belief in God. Like, that's amazing.
I must have believed in God. I think it's just that it was the wrong God that I believed in. I believed in a God imagined by the, you know, early Jewish Bible scribes, you know, because
which is punishing.
This God doesn't exist, but obviously the fact that you know, I don't know, it's still God that I have these feelings towards, and it's kind of like you purify the God image that you have, you know,
right? Because you've got some pure feelings when you see the quirky animal, when you see like the bright green worm in nature, and you are delighted. That's you connecting with the real part of God.
And that's also, I feel like I know for sure I had to go through a whole period of emotional allowance to even get to the point that I believe that God made those creatures, that is God's design. I had a lot of, like, before this whole Catholic thing started to sort of come out, before that came out of the closet, I was developing this, okay, so I love creation. And did God create all that stuff, Did God make it? And so I got a lot of, like, sort of education from God about the fact that was the case, like an emotional, like, it was beautiful, But that had to happen first, I feel, and then I was like, right, so why? And then I was like, but why don't I want to interact with you then? If you're this creator of this amazing stuff that I love so much, that I'm just like, that's the only joy I get in life, How come I hate you so much? Like, I don't want anything to do with you. Like, what is wrong? That discrepancy was just too painful. And I was just so punishing with that as well. It's like, how can I be like this? Like, I don't get it. Like,
You're
why am I
like
such a
angry
bitch to
with
you?
yourself about it. Yeah.
And then
that was really helpful, huh? I'm being sarcastic, people.
Yeah. Well, it needed to be this, like, I needed to get some anger towards someone somewhere in order for it to, do you know what I mean? I was like pissed off. I couldn't understand it. I was frustrated because I couldn't understand it, And then it started to come out, this whole Catholic thing. So I suppose I want to do a series of discussions about like how these beliefs have prevented me from developing a relationship with God. But what I'm really curious about is, because I don't know the Bible, I haven't read it, and I feel like I probably should.
Read Job. I feel like that would be really good for you as a Catholic. Have you heard the story of Job?
Tell me, maybe
I'll give you I won't spoil it for you.
He probably had a different name in Polish. That's why I'm like...
J-O-B, like job, but pronounced Job. And it's about a son of God, not like the Christians think of Jesus, but just some guy. And basically God demands that he suffer and suffer and suffer and suffer to prove that he really loves God. That seems like it would be right up the Catholic alley.
Yeah.
I mean, he gets sick, he loses family members, he loses all of his material wealth. It's pretty brutal. It's like torturous.
There's so many brutal things in the Bible. Because I remember reading the first page of the
And people
Old
think
Testament.
Job was a good Christian,
Right.
And
that's
the way,
I'm Job.
Yeah. Right, exactly, yeah.
I mean, obviously I haven't been, haven't had all those things happen, but...
Right. Emotionally, you feel like that is right, and that's how you
It's literally self-flagellation, emotional and spiritual self-flagellation. Like, these times when I do this are so, so dark, and the spirits that love this sort of thing just jump in on it. So I feel like I'm in the hells in that time, I am, and I'm bringing the hells, like I'm willingly going to hell with that, I know it sounds, but it does, it feels like that emotionally, and it's hard to get out of, and it's a horrible state, and whoever believes in a punishing God, you need to, like, work through that and feel that it's what you believe in, admit it, But I do, this is one thing that I really wanted, like, was really cool today, because I was like, the one thing I want to say is for people to look at, what kind of God do you actually believe in, What does your religious faith, based on how you treat others, based on what you believe of your country or your way of life, it tells you what you believe about God. Like, that's a revelation for me, It was a revelation today, and I thought it's a good
it's very different for different people, right? Like, some people are going to think that a good God is like a God who is mommies you and takes care of you, and some people are going to think it's a very autocratic, bossy, mean God, or some people are going to think it's just a very distant person who you don't really see or talk to, and they're just out there doing their own thing, and you kind of got to follow their rules, So I mean, it's not one size fits all. Obviously there's going to be themes like you were talking about with Catholicism and stuff like that, but
and like, for someone who listens to Divine Truth, for any of your listeners that do, like, what for me has been a revelation is that I believe self-punishment, and if they also happen to be Catholic, and I know there's some of our friends
there's
that
a
are
lot
like
of ex-Catholics who are in the Divine Truth, so like, please, preach.
Well, one of the things is...
pun intended.
No, I don't. But more like, that I realized that self-punishment is that's how I am obedient to God. That's what, I couldn't believe
That's the
that.
false belief
So
you have.
yes, and I that's why I was like, well, I must be doing the right thing and I didn't realize, but I now and emotionally know that to me self-punishment is a false belief about that's what obedience looks like. That's the only way to be obedient to God. So if I'm listening to Jesus talk about God's laws, and there I am self-punishing, about my sin, because it's like, well, yeah, that's what the law requires me to do. That's what obedience to law means. It's a revelation in a sense, but it's a painful one. But I'm sure there'll be and this is partly why I want to do, I want to discuss more religious, and I'd love to talk to you about this actually as well. About your own.
As a Protestant, as a WASP.
Yeah, WASP.
Do you know what a WASP is?
You had to tell me that when I first asked you what religious background you
It's
have.
a white Anglo-Saxon
That's right.
Protestant. Yeah. So Methodists, Lutherans, Presbyterians.
Yeah. I read in the what religion was it? I'm gonna forget it. But I looked up the curve on Wikipedia of what religion the US is.
Oh yeah, yep.
And there was one which I found really interesting.
Yeah.
Because Wisely, there's two
Wesley?
people in
John Wesley?
Two people in the Padgett messages that
Yes. John Wesley, yeah.
What religion is?
I think he was a Protestant of some sort.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I just can't remember what one.
Oh, we can look it up really quick.
Yeah. It was
John Wesley. Yeah,
because that's what most American people are. They fit into that
Wesleyan. What is the church?
Really
Okay.
Just
Methodism. Yep.
Methodist.
Yeah, so Methodists, and that's their WASPs.
That's it.
Yep. So
They're WASPs
Methodists,
as well.
Lutherans, Presbyterians. These are
Right.
kind of the holy trinity of Protestants.
It's so interesting. And I always imagine that, I don't know, I have a feeling that maybe you guys have, these religious sects are way less wrathful than the Catholic. I just have this feeling for some reason. I don't
Catholics,
know why.
yeah, I think that it might be a bit softer. Yeah. But, I mean, Puritans were Protestants too, right? And you've heard the adjective puritanical.
What does that mean?
Puritans were some of the first people to colonize America because they were seeking religious freedom, right? And they lived a very Spartan lifestyle, which there's nothing wrong with that, but they were very critical and condemning of people who sinned,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then there's also, like
burning witches and stuff like that. You know what I mean?
Wow. Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it could get pretty dark with the
religion
Protestants
is
too.
so full on, isn't it?
But I just don't think that the Protestants have this long, dark history that Catholicism has. I mean, Catholicism has been going along a lot longer. Yeah.
And it came from the original sort of like the Jewish Judeo-Christian sort of
Judeo-Christian.
Yeah, the beginnings of that sort of like very still entrenched in not so much the New Testament but the Old Testament. I feel
I feel like Protestants are more Protestants. And if you think it like modern Protestants, so like Pentecostals, they're all about Jesus and talking about Jesus. Where Catholicism,
It's freaking weird as well because we like in Poland, and I don't know if this applies to all the Catholic. I just talk about Roman Catholic Church in Poland specifically because that's all I know. But there's this like the whole Mother Mary, like that picture over there. That was hung out, in my bedroom at home in Poland.
So Sandy's pointing at a picture in her home of
Mother
Saint
Mary with
beautiful.
Jesus. It's beautiful. It's made out of like plants. But what I'm saying is, like the Mother Mary is a thing. Like, we pray to Mary a lot.
Right. It's more like Catholicism has more like
and Jesus
pagan overtones in it, right? Because when the Roman Catholic Church established it, right, they kind of mixed in the pagan beliefs too. I think that's where a lot of the saints.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, this is what I like. One of the things I like about Catholicism is that there's a lot of incense.
Oh yes, the myrrh. I think it smells pretty good.
Yeah, it does.
There are some really good things about like church.
Robes.
But you know
I
what?
want to live in robes.
One of the things that really struck me was like the opulence in Catholic churches in Poland.
Oh, yeah.
They're all like very rich, and people are like really, really poor
They're
in
sad.
communism.
It's
And
sad.
they're like all these grandmas giving away their last bit of, bit of cash that they got from their pension.
Right.
To these
The
Catholic
churches
priests.
always
And
have
these
just
dudes
had
were
so
the
much.
only guys with cars, the only guys that could just go on skiing holidays whenever they wanted. It was It was debauchery. It was like,
Right.
yeah,
It's messed up.
it's so bad. It is a bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think maybe other religions don't have that. I don't know. I don't
Right.
know.
Well, I mean, I don't know. Like a classic Protestant religion in the U.S., Mormonism, everybody has to give 10% of their income, and if you
Wow.
don't, like, they're gonna find out.
Oh,
You know,
they're gonna find out.
not to say that they're like the mafia, but they keep tabs
There's
on people.
pressure.
There's pressure, exactly. I'm sure that some Mormons don't, but yeah, if you want to, participate, there's pressure. There's
Wow.
pressure even if you don't go to church. You miss a few Sundays. Yeah.
There is a church in Padgett Messages, which was really interesting. I can't remember what it is, but I've gotten it written down.
I'm so glad you brought this up because I have not brought up the Padgett Messages in the podcast
And
so
it's so
far.
brilliant
It's
'cause
an American thing.
There's so much American in there as well, like about American
Baltimore.
people coming, but there was a church where people were receiving divine love a lot.
Oh yeah, did they ever name the church though?
Yes. Do you want me to
Sure.
get it out? The church is in Washington, D.C., and
Okay.
it's called the Church of the Holiness.
You don't know what religion that is? The Church of the Holiness.
No, it just says that.
Okay.
We could look up 1915 Church of the Holiness, the church in the Washington,
It was
D.C.
it was in Washington D.C. Church of God Holiness is what it's called. Okay, originating in the 19th century as an outgrowth of the Methodist Church, it teaches Wesleyan doctrine. John Wesleyan and is aligned with conservative holiness movement. Founded in 1883, that would match up with Padgett Messages. Sought to actualize the New Testament Church. Okay. Is Church of God or Church of Holiness is a member of the Global Wesleyan Alliance and Interchurch Holiness Convention. So there's definitely some John Wesley influences there. Yeah.
So cool. There's so
Thank
much
you,
potential.
John Wesley. Yeah, so Americans, if you're into divine truth, check out the Padgett Messages, and hear what some of these people had to say. These people who were famous Americans, what they thought about their life was good and righteous, and what they thought wasn't. They realized was not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that's the thing. That's another thing why it's important to look at our beliefs and our way of life now, because we're going to be suffering so much when we pass if we don't. And that's another thing to avoid all this pain and suffering. We're already in pain and suffering.
What would you say to people who don't believe in an afterlife?
That they're going to have a surprise when they pass.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
I spoke to a man recently and he was raised in a religious, I can't remember what religion it was. But then when he was a teenager, he's like, no, this isn't true. He was an altar boy and everything, And he said that, because, he's like, the earth is all we've got. But even when and then I thought about it later, and I said to him, look,
The earth life.
when you pass, come and talk to me. I invited him to have a chat. He's like, look, when I do pass and I'm still alive, I'd love to, because I'd be very surprised. He wasn't against, he wasn't...
He didn't
like,
argue with you and
he
say
didn't
you're
argue
wrong.
with me.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. But I thought about this later. I thought about this a lot as a Buddhist as well. Because I thought to myself, if we pass and the earth life is all we have, then there is no justice.
That was my hardest part of being an atheist, is that that was really sad to me, to think that there was no justice. And that was one of the things of solace I had being Christian.
And I know it sounds harsh, because it feels to me like my justification for an afterlife was, it makes sense, because it would be so unfair if you're like living like a king and you've murdered people and you were like, say, an emperor or a politician that just ruthlessly used everyone, had all the money in the world, murdered people, did all these awful things and then got away with it.
Right.
When he passes, there's no consequences, and
Right.
he never got to suffer any consequences. I know that sounds really harsh, but at the same time, to me, it's like, well, cause and effect is a evident law in this universe, and I thought that is the consequences always have to happen. You know, they don't always have to happen because God's love can mitigate a lot of the consequence, but there's still pain and consequence, regardless of whether God helps us with it or not. I feel like we need to know that every action, every choice we make is always going to have a consequence, you know? And it's sort of like, because it just seems to me like, well, how do we all just we'd get away with everything? We'd get away with murder, you know, if there wasn't consequences. And I'm not saying afterlife is for the purpose of consequences, but that was one of the logic things that I used that logic, you know?
It is logical to think that there's an afterlife for that reason because, like you said, everything, there's cause and effect in the physical world, so that's going to apply spiritually as well. Right.
It has to.
If I knock this bowl off the table, gravity is going to take its effect and it's going to hit the ground.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. But also at the same time, I'm like, but there's a lot of scientific reasons for
Yeah, and also matter cannot be created or destroyed, so,
that's right.
Okay, we're just...
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of... But, like, you know, it's sometimes... Yeah. And I know that a lot of, you know, religious people are very afraid of... I certainly feel afraid of the hells, you know, being in the hells.
Yes, same.
And I feel like I've experienced living in the hells in my condition, you know. Still do sometimes, like actually feel like this is hell, like it's hellish where I'm at because of my beliefs or choices that I make, you know. But I don't think we have a clue as to what it's going to be like not to have this physical body and only be experiencing the spirit, you know, existence. That's why I'm like, I do not want people to suffer like that. I would love for people to have, you know, imagine if, I just often feel like if we all receive this gift of God's love, like, I just want for people to be happy, you know. It'd be so beautiful. It'd be so, it just would, just, yeah, it's joyful for me to think that there's a possibility of everyone to be happy, not just, you know, a few people.
That's really sweet, Sandy.
I do. I feel like, yeah, more and more I really desire that for humanity, you know. And yeah, God created such beautiful universe for us to function in, to play in, you know. It just feels like what a waste that we're living in this misery. We're wasting it, you know, wasting the gift. Yeah, wasting the gift of our precious life. But I don't know. You know, maybe God doesn't see it as a waste, just sees it as causes and effects and consequences. I don't know.
Well, we went into a really lovely digression about God there and belief systems and stuff, which wasn't necessarily about America, but
delete half of it.
Yeah, no, I like that because I mean I like how passionate you're speaking about God, and especially since you've been having these revelations lately about Christianity, specifically Catholicism, that does relate to the U.S. in a way. So, but anyways, was there anything that you think Americans or Westerners in general, if there's one of the 5 principles, truth, love, humility, which means feeling all your feelings, faith, which is your desire to do things, and action in line with the previous 4, that you think Westerners should focus on? Is there one, or is it just all 5?
I find that all of them supplement and complement each other.
They have to go together.
Yeah, because if you try to eliminate one, and Jesus does talk about lately a lot in the presentations he's giving all around the world, that
humility.
He prays for humility, because when you're humble, then you're you know, faithful. Then you've got faith, and then you've got you want truth because you want to be open to everything that you feel, and so yeah, I don't know, obviously, because I struggle myself with, you know.
I struggle with humility. I feel like that's the hardest one, so I feel like that's the one I'm focusing on. Yeah, and I feel like with Americans generally, we want our comforts. We have this entitlement to not feel feelings, so it's a pretty important one. Yeah.
But I think in general the world doesn't want to feel, so we need to want to feel if we're going to have a relationship with God.
because God communicates with us only through feelings, and God's love is a feeling. So obviously it makes sense that if we don't open our hearts to our feelings and God, then we won't open ourselves to God's feelings. So therefore we're doomed. I shouldn't say that. Because it sounds like the only way to be happy is,
No one's doomed, but
no
there's
one's doomed.
some people you can suffer. How long do we want to suffer?
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, just to recap what we've talked about, we introduced yourself, Sandy, a Polish Australian, your formative years in Poland, adult and later childhood years in Australia, and then a year in the U.S., and also has traveled to Central America. And you lived in the U.K. briefly as well,
Lived in
6
Ireland
months.
for 4 months.
4 months, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that your background in growing up in a communist country is really unique in that you could see the stark difference, even it being two Western countries, from the scarcity in communist Poland to the abundance in, America and Philadelphia. And so I just appreciate you sharing with us, because that's such a unique perspective. And some of the things you discussed about America was the entitlement, big portion sizes, air conditioning, racism. Those were like the two big points you wanted to drive home. And then we kind of fear, yep, with guns, yep. And then that kind of brought us into a discussion about God and what kind of God do Americans think they have or Westerners think they have, and how our feelings about God dictate what we do and the choices we make. And also I think a good point you made was about entitlement, and that the reason we're entitled is because we don't feel good inside, and we feel like we shouldn't have to feel things, and it's not helping. It's not making us happy to be entitled. It's not.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah. Was there anything else that we didn't touch upon that you would want to talk
Yeah,
about?
I think I think what I sort of didn't maybe clarify enough. I feel like that inequality, when we talked about racism, and even though there's like opulent areas of society in Philly, but also out there divulged on the street is the poverty, and that, I think, that inequality is so starkly out there in the open, street to street.
Right. There's
I didn't make
a
link to that as how it's okay that the equality is seen as something normal, inequality, that inequality, racial inequality, and the way people live. It's just like, what's the problem? I think in Australia it's more like hidden, and it's all kind of like more like a streamlined. You don't really see that difference as much. But that's something that's quite obvious and stark in the US, particularly in Philadelphia. I don't know about other places, but yeah, I think I didn't bring it back to how unequal that is and how we see inequality as a normal part of life, rather than what God's laws are, that we are all equal. God's truth is we're all equal, but we don't live that way, and I think that's another huge problem in society.
Inequality is seen as the norm.
That's right.
Even though politicians and people will say that we're all equal, and that's the thing about America, is anybody can make it. The vibe is different.
That's right. If you're, it's difficult to get up from when you're downtrodden. And that's what I feel for Aboriginal people in Australia as well. After years of oppression, it's very difficult to have equal opportunity. It just, even though the government throws money at it and we pay lip service to the fact that that's what it is, we are, that we're working on towards that more equal standard. I just don't think it exists. I don't think it's reality, But anyway, that's all I wanted to say, just to clarify that bit.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, first off, I just want to thank you. I just feel very privileged to be able to spend time with you and become friends with you. And I just think you're really cool person. And just thanks for taking the time to share with me today. I know you've got other things going on in your life, so appreciate that. And can you tell our listeners, where can they find out more information about you if they wanted to watch this YouTube? If when you share things about Catholicism and how that affects your relationship with God, where's that going to be? Like, give us some deets if you'd like to.
Yeah, literally, it's just my name. So like my YouTube channel. So it's just my name, Sandra
Tuszynska.
Yep. So you can see how that's spelled on Helena.
And I'll put this in the show notes. Yeah.
So that's just my YouTube channel.
Okay, I'll link to that.
And I've just got a few videos on there, but I just would like to make more, you know. And then I've got a soil restoration course YouTube channel, literally soil restoration course, because that's what
Soil.
My passion is in, you know, restoring soils with life. So on an agricultural as well as ecosystem level. So I talk about all the creatures in the soil and how they interact, the ecology of the soil, and how agriculture has destroyed that, and why we're potentially going to starve to death. You know, if we don't do something about regenerating it. And so that's where people can do the course for free. It's literally just 50 or so lessons.
Just 50 or so lessons, you guys. That's a lot of lessons.
I know. It's taken me like 2 years to create it. I'm still going. So, and it's going to then be the practical for the rest of my life. I want to show it on a practical, in a practical way as well. So that's where people can, like, if they're into that sort of, you know, if they're interested in that sort of, well, an important area of humanity, learning about that more, and then it's all there. So and the website is the same, soil restoration course, and I've got a blog that I started to write, which is called Loving God. Blog. Loving God.blog.
Okay.
So yeah.
All right, I will link those in the show notes.
Yep. Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure talking to you. I hope we're going to have more of these discussions.
Yeah. That was really awesome.
The religious
I like
stuff.
the way you were talking about God and stuff. Yeah, it was really cool. And John Wesley, and I want to like look more into him.
Yeah, sounds like a cool guy.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Sandra, for being on the show.
Thank you so much, Helena. All the best. See you guys.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Sandy. I wanted to throw a couple corrections and one annotation here at the end of the episode. Firstly, I incorrectly stated that Sandy lived in the UK. She did not live in the UK. She lived in Ireland for 4 months. Sandy misspoke about when she lived in the US. She said it was 2006, but it was actually 2007. We discussed the percentage of Aboriginal people in Australia. I went to the Bureau of Statistics website and found the actual percentage is 3.2% of the population as of 2021. Sandy mentioned a book that she couldn't remember the name of about the US. That book is Dude, Where's My Country by Michael Moore. Lastly, I incorrectly said that US Puritans burned witches. They didn't burn these people, they killed them by hanging them. Burning witches was more of a European thing, apparently. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I hope to catch you guys on another episode of Born in the USA, Unloving American Attitudes. Thank you.